Hey everybody. I'm Brent. I'm not going to give you my bio because hopefully this talk will give you an idea of my whole deal. So today I'm going to talk to you about a subject that has never been talked about at WordHack before, artificial intelligence. Later on, at Todd's request, I'm going to talk a bit about spreadsheets as well. So since 2022, when Midjourney, ChatGPT, and Stable Diffusion all came out, no one has really been able to shut the fuck up about AI and how it's going to change the world, is already changing it, is going to replace all of us, is going to make our lives better, so on and so forth. There is the good, using ChatGPT to automate the hellish tasks that none of us actually want to do, like writing cover letters, or we can use text-to-image generators to make cursed images of us winning hot dog eating contests. There's the objectively hilarious, a chatbot selling a car for $1, or ChatGPT insisting, no matter what you tell it, that there are only 2 R's in the word strawberry. But mostly, there is bad. They're replacing workers, running scams, tricking all the boomers into upvoting Shrimp Jesus on Facebook, or in the case of Google Gemini, encouraging people to eat glue, or the deadly Amanita mushroom. For better or worse, and mostly worse, generative AI is being put into production across almost every domain. But why is this happening? I'd like to make the argument that the tools themselves are relatively value neutral, and the issue is primarily with the incentive structures that have been built around them. These incentives take 3 forms. First, AI is, for the tech giants, finally the killer app for all the data they've spent the last decade and change hoovering up. Data-driven advertising has, at this point, pretty much been proven to be bullshit, but now they have a use for all the information on our porn habits or our Instagram shopping that they've collected. The second is capitalism. Given an opportunity to reduce the labor force and automate something out, capital will always take that opportunity. In an ideal world, automation would not be a bad thing. I would love to have AI handle all of the bullshit that I don't actually like doing. But unfortunately, we don't live in that world, and AI is mostly just used to replace people. The biggest bummer to me is the ways it's being marketed as a replacement for things that, whether or not it's good at them, are fundamentally enjoyable to do, are part of the human experience, like art and writing. As somebody on Tumblr said, what's next? A computer that eats my dinner and fucks my wife? Thank you. So the third, and maybe the most interesting to me, is what I call the human-machine centipede. It's an emergent effect of introducing algorithmic behavior to our online lives. It's the pattern wherein an algorithm affects people's behavior, while their behavior is then fed back into its training data. Oh, better? Worse?
A little closer.
Okay. The effect of this pattern, put in simple terms, is to make an algorithm behave more like a person, while it makes people behave in ways that suit the algorithm. This loop presents a bizarre flattening effect. Eventually, when an algorithm and its users reach equilibrium, all of the content mediated by the algorithm kind of becomes the same. Put more simply, it is a recursive loop of garbage. We start out with some sort of data set, we feed it to the algorithm, it feeds garbage to us, we make even more garbagey garbage to please it, that becomes its new data set, and the cycle continues forever. Take, for example, the LinkedIn feed. You're gonna see LinkedIn pop up a bit during this talk. It's one of my favorite examples because LinkedIn is kind of the id of the internet. It is a totally lawless hellscape. Nobody actually likes using it, but we all accept it as a necessary evil for job searching. It's a place full of spam and nonsense, but the thing that most interests me is the specific type of post you see on LinkedIn. You all know what I'm talking about. It's an obviously fake anecdote with some ending message about how to be a better employee, broken up into individual lines and short sentences. This is a classic human-machine centipede. Sometime 7 years ago, a post like this was made, it received enough likes, and the algorithm learned that the specific type of sicko who tends to spend a lot of time on LinkedIn wants to see shit like this. Everyone starts writing their posts like this in the hopes that they'll appeal to the algorithm, and you end up with an endless timeline where everything sounds like it was written by the same growth hacking YouTuber. So before I continue, I don't think AI is all bad. It's a big field that contains a lot of useful things. Please do not come at me and say, what about computer vision or whatever? Just take AI in this talk as a shorthand for generative models. And even those have their uses. But the fact remains that generative AI software is being pushed out before it's ready to be used. It lies constantly, it creates security nightmares, and it takes jobs that it has no business doing. In addition to all of that, it is clogging the internet with an endless flow of AI-generated slop that is making everyone's user experience worse. I wish I could say that in this talk I will be presenting some silver bullet to this problem, but short of comprehensive sponsored legislation in Congress, an actual labor movement, or the total destruction of NVIDIA and AMD's manufacturing facilities, which I in no way endorse, I only see one way out. With the help of AI, the internet is going to eat itself and pave the way for something new. The good news is, it's probably gonna happen sooner than we think, and we can help it along. I'll explain how I think this is gonna happen in a bit, but first I'd like to talk about how we got here. I'm skipping about 50 years of history and starting in 2020. Look, I only have 20 minutes, give me a fucking break. By 2020, we had the beginnings of what you might consider modern AI. OpenAI had released its first publicly available GPT model, and some of the first true coherent image generation models were being released. This was thanks to two things, transformer architecture, which is the T in ChatGPT, and diffusion models in image generation. Something else happened in 2020 that you guys might remember. Like most people, I was slowly going insane as my life went entirely digital. So I began work on a project using AI to automate my digital presence as much as possible. Yeah, it worked really well. I called it Echoes. It was a full software suite that used what was at the time cutting-edge AI to automate everything I did online. Emails, text messages, and even Zoom calls. I trained models on my email and text data and segmented them into time period and emotion. So you could email me from college to get a really depressed and apologetic model, or you could text an angry version of me that was literally willing to kill me, which still bothers me a little bit. So, I lost my slide order, but you guys are enjoying it, so. This project wasn't necessarily successful in replacing me, but it did lead me to a few conclusions. I also had a voice model, but my audio is broken, so I'm not gonna show you guys it. I can share the documentation later. These tools weren't actually ready to replace anybody, but they became a lot more interesting because, and not in spite of, their jankiness. I came to the conclusion that fundamentally, the most interesting work done with AI is done outside of big companies and massive server farms. If you're working with machine learning, use it the wrong way. Break it, sabotage it, and most importantly, use your own data sets. The data was probably the most interesting part of this project. I had the opportunity to discover versions of myself from my own data that's been stored online for decades. They were versions of myself that I had forgotten existed, from the sorrowful to the desperate to the hopeful. If you want to put an authorial hand into ML training, the data set is where it happens. Curate it yourself, source it yourself, train the model yourself, and you get something that feels like just maybe you actually made it. And that leads to the first weak point I discovered for the human-machine centipede. Its data set. The data set a model is trained on is the main thing that affects its output. If we change that, we can change the model. Make it worse, make it better, make it do what we want. I really can't emphasize this enough. Even James Bettker, who's an OpenAI engineer, openly acknowledges this fact. The it in an AI model is the data set and nothing else. And since data sets are made from people at big enough scale, we can change them. So now let's cut to 2022. This is the start of the contemporary AI revolution. It's the release of ChatGPT, Stable Diffusion, and Midjourney. ChatGPT was a bigger, better language model that was the first widely used model trained on reinforcement learning with human feedback. It's the process by which a model repeatedly gets feedback from a human labeler so that its output is ostensibly better or safer. Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, the new text-to-image models, mostly came from one thing: datasets. The most notable maybe being Lion 5B, a dataset of 5.5 billion image text pairs that allowed for massive improvements in models like these. This is about the time I really started to develop my ideas about the human-machine centipede, as from their release, these things were starting to eat the internet. So I started thinking about ways to accelerate or sabotage this process. I became particularly interested in two phenomena: overfitting and mode collapse. Overfitting is a well-documented phenomenon in machine learning. It's widely considered to be undesirable. It's what occurs when your model can really only replicate its training data or something close to it. So, for example, you feed your model the Communist Manifesto, and all it can create is the Communist Manifesto. Not necessarily a bad outcome. Another problem that can arise specifically in GANs, or generative adversarial networks, is mode collapse. A GAN consists of a generator, which generates the image, and a discriminator, which tries to tell if the image is fake. But if you keep training your model after it's fooled the discriminator, it starts to pursue any pattern that works, whether or not that output is actually good to the human eye. This results in various AI-generated monstrosities like the anime babes above. At this time, I had also started to revisit my own fascination with LinkedIn. I decided to train text and image generation models on data I scraped from LinkedIn to see if I could create the ideal Meta or Google employee. I started out doing standard model training, and well, the images were monsters from the start. I don't know what happened, but the text models could have passed for real LinkedIn bios. This maybe captured some of my feelings about the sameness of everything you see on LinkedIn, but I felt like I could make it worse. So I decided to intentionally induce overfitting and mode collapse to see what would come of it. And this is where I felt like I started to get at the heart of something. My models started screaming into the void, crying to be seen as the proud employees they were. They made the subtext of LinkedIn text. And that, to me, is artificial intelligence working as intended. Once we interact with models and models interact with us, we all eventually even out to a position where we are overfit to one another, and all we can do is what we think the model wants us to. And that takes us to today. I've already gone over the AI-generated hellscape that we live in, but I would like to talk about a project I've been working on for the past year with the support of a Mozilla Creative Media Award, which is Dataville. I'd also like to shout out my team members, Life, Ian, Henry, and Arnab. This project is a lot bigger than me. Cool video. Okay, so Dataville is a game where you assume the role of a data labeler working for a shady AI company in a not-so-distant future where alien refugees have begun migrating to Earth. In the game, you can choose to encourage or discourage the model's inherent biases, help aliens sabotage your company's models, and even unionize, a game mechanic I insisted on. All your actions affect the state of the in-game world. Ultimately, my hope is that the game leads players to recognize that the only way to prevent these systems from being used for ill is a combination of collective action and sabotage. Do as you're told, and we end up making AI better while everything else gets worse. But we do have the power to change its outcome. This is just a picture of the Pope that I thought was funny. So, a little bit of explanation. Data labelers are maybe the most important people in the AI training pipeline, alongside maybe every single one of us whose data has been scraped without our consent. Labelers are subject to terrible labor practices, low pay, and all the endless humiliations associated with gig labor. And if AI continues to automate away jobs, we are going to see a lot more people entering this hot new industry. In the game, you specifically take the role of somebody working on RLHF, which is that process used to train ChatGPT where a human's in the loop rating the model's output. The interesting thing about RLHF is that it introduces a new attack point for the human-machine centipede. RLHF labelers have a unique power to determine what a model thinks is right or wrong, what its value system is, and thus what the end user ends up getting. At Todd's request, I'm going to do a little sidebar about game design here. Okay. For a very long time, people have been trying to develop frameworks for narrative game development that are easy to use for non-technical people. You've got languages like Ink, RenPy, Twine, Inform, tons more. All of these, in my estimation, tend to have the same problem, which is that for anything more complex than a linear story, they quickly become too complex for a non-programmer to use. You can kind of see it here. Ink is pretty simple to the programmers in the audience, but it still reads like code to a normal person. This becomes especially difficult when you want to do things like have a complex branching story route or elaborate state models that affect gameplay. And in Dataville, we have a ton of that. The most crucial thing here is that our narrative designer, Ian, who's in the audience, yeah, he's great, needed to be able to test out different types of state and different story routes, basically anything that changed how the game was experienced. And Ian is not a programmer, which there is no shame in. I want to be clear about that. But you know what most non-technical people know how to use? Spreadsheets. So I ended up putting every single changeable or interactive part of the game, script, state, and everything else, into a spreadsheet that the game parses and then slots into its UI. This picture contains every piece of the state and script for about a minute and a half of our game. It is an absolute behemoth, and if I were a better person, I would have used automatic highlighting or literally anything to make it easier for a human to read, but I think it proves a theory that I had. Spreadsheets just work if you need non-technical people doing things like playing with game state and scripting. It's a bit of lift, and you will probably end up with something that looks psychotic like this, but I still think it's the best solution I've come up with. So, next time you in the audience are making a game, instead of trying out the latest hot new low-code game engine, consider the noble spreadsheet. So when I proposed this talk to Todd a few months ago, I thought the game would be out and playable by now. The game designers in this audience may recognize my hubris. It is not out yet, but fingers crossed we're releasing it for free on itch next month. But before then, we are looking for playtesters. So there's a QR code and a link there if you're interested in playtesting the game. We did our best to make something that plays like an actual game and isn't just Hell Simulator, but I would love to hear your thoughts to the contrary. Okay, sidebar over, back to artificial intelligence. Let's talk about what comes next. I said at the beginning of this talk that the internet is going to destroy itself, but how is that going to happen? The pattern, as I see it, is the latest iteration of the human-machine feedback loop. It is the massive amounts of AI-generated content now available everywhere on the internet. The main issue here is data contamination. Whenever they train the newest version of ChatGPT or Stable Diffusion from this point on, the dataset is going to have AI-generated content in it. This is similar to attacking datasets, but I want to differentiate it since it's novel and you can do it at scale. Instead of manually producing bad data, posting about how Donald Trump exploded on a jet ski or whatever, we can automate that now. We can poison datasets at a much larger scale than with an individual action. And once that starts to happen, two things follow. Either things get really bad and weird when it comes to AI. When you're training image generators, for example, you quickly see image quality degrade and you see monsters like the ones I was creating 2 years ago. Or things get boring. Generative algorithms are frozen at some point in time when the last uncontaminated data set was made, or they use sanitized synthetic data to compensate. This, to me, is the dystopian outcome. Everything starts to conform to whatever the algorithm thought was normal in 2022. This effect is already kind of taking place. There's a reason that your LinkedIn or Instagram feeds are full of seemingly identical content. So a lot of people are trying to solve these problems. People want to make AI better, more reliable, people want to figure out better ways to train models, but I would like to suggest a different approach. The internet is dominated by a few small platforms, well, very large platforms, that are only getting worse, and AI is accelerating that process, so let's add fuel to the fire. Let's use AI to make the internet as it stands totally unusable, so that something new can take its place. How do we get there, you ask? Intentional sabotage. For example, because AI assistants like Google Gemini pull live data from the internet to get up-to-date responses, they are astonishingly easy to troll. Specifically, because they're trained to pull from websites like Tumblr or Reddit, if enough people post that you should eat a rock every day, it'll happen. Even the infamous glue on pizza response was just from an 11-year-old Reddit comment by some dude named Fucksmith. We have the power to make things worse just by posting. I've been working on my own project to add fuel to this fire. I have been overtraining, mistraining, and feeding image generators their own output. Once I'm done, I plan to automate posting this content everywhere image scrapers are found, mislabel them as much as possible, and do my part to further contaminate any new datasets that are made. AI technology has given us the seeds of its own destruction, and buddy, we can run them at scale. And you can too. Tag your images incorrectly, upload code that doesn't work to GitHub, post on Reddit about how Kanye West got shot into the fucking sun, sign up for a data labeling service and do an intentionally bad job. We've got all the attack points, we just need to use them. Do your part. Do your part to sabotage the software being forced upon us and accelerate the death of the internet as we know it. Help it finish eating itself. Only from its ashes can something new be born. Thanks for listening.